the first time I heard of her in the EMDR was in the 1989 article that she wrote in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. And then I saw her in person in October of that year, of 89. She was presenting at International Society of Traumatic Stress Studies in San Francisco. And she presented and, of course, was magnificent. And she played a videotape of a veteran, session with a veteran. And I was intrigued, skeptical, but intrigued.
Welcome to Conversations on the Compassion Works Way. So I'm Jordan Schaefer, and this is a chance for me to talk with people about what they're doing and things they know about that I find interesting and think are important. I think you will too. Today, this is a conversation with Roger Solomon. He's a psychologist and senior trainer with the EMDR Institute. So Roger was in the first group of people that worked with Francine Shapiro, the developer of EMDR, as she developed and introduced EMDR therapy. So here I talk with Roger about how he first met Francine and got involved with EMDR. We talk about the early days of EMDR, and a little bit about what it was like working and traveling with Francine. Roger also talks about some of the development of EMDR therapy, and really Francine's openness to new ideas about it, especially regarding working with attachment disorders, and then the ways to use EMDR to treat them. He also talks about some of his current EMDR projects and interests. I think you'll like this conversation. Roger's very excited and alive, and he loves to talk about EMDR. So here we go with Roger Solomon. Yeah, it has been a few years. How are you doing? Are you doing okay?
Yeah. Life's good. Okay, so what's new with you?
Well, I got this great idea to, let me see, I'm going to change the view here. I don't know. To talk to people that knew Francine to get a little more history, I guess, to kind of to learn more about what it was like in the good old days.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought about you. So I don't know. So, how did you meet Francine in the first place? You were one of the early ones, right?
Yeah. Well, the first time I heard of her in the EMDR was in the 1989 article that she wrote in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. And then I saw her in person in October of that year, of 89. She was presenting at International Society of Traumatic Stress Studies in San Francisco. And she presented and, of course, was magnificent. And she played a videotape of a veteran, session with a veteran. And I was intrigued, skeptical, but intrigued.
Oh, you were skeptical?
Yeah.
So starting out, you were skeptical?
You think, eye movement, and skeptical. But the art was intriguing, and it made sense that maybe there's something about the rapid eye movement that at the time it was thought maybe stimulate the same mechanisms as REM sleep. And she had data, and she showed the video. But it was after that session, I went to Santa Cruz. There had been the earthquake in San Francisco in 1989, and it would been postponed. The earthquake had been postponed to October, and I had been invited to do some debriefings with the mental health center staff in Santa Cruz, the epicenter of the earthquake, to do some intervention.
Was that the earthquake at Candlestick Park, or what going on at that time?
Yes, that's right.
That was it.
Well, was that the one in? That may have been another one where the Bay Bridge. I think that was the same one. Santa Cruz was the epicenter, and the Bay Bridge tilted, and the wharf to in 1989. Yeah. Okay. And that was the same one. So San Francisco got a little wrecked, and Santa Cruz, little damage. Well, that veteran that I had seen on the videotape was one of the volunteers in Santa Cruz, and also was a therapist. And I got to talking to him and asked him if it worked. And he said that, yes, it works. And I asked him to show me. And he asked me to bring up something that was bothering me. And I brought up a disturbing event that had occurred. And he did a couple of sets. And after a couple of sets, I remember thinking, I really don't understand why this is bothering me. And then I realized something shifted. So I took the training in June of 1990, which was the second class that she taught. I started using it right away and stayed in touch with Francine and sponsored her coming to Seattle, Washington. At the time in 1990, I was the department psychologist with the Washington State Patrol. So
right, I remember
coming
that.
up, to do training. And she asked me also to assist with other trainings. And then in 1993, 30 years ago, she needed more trainers. And so she selected 13 people. I was one of them, and still with the EMDR Institute of Francine Shapiro.
So did you run across the guy though at the earthquake? Was that happenstance? I mean, you met him there? How did
just happenstance? He just
you recognized
happened to be there. Well,
I mean, you recognized him from the video, or how?
Was
he a therapist at that time, or just
yes?
And he was okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you took one of her second training, I guess, in What was that, in San Francisco?
It was actually Palo Alto. So she had, there was one, she had been to Israel and did trainings in Israel before. And then in 1990, she had one in March, which I wasn't able to make. I made the one in June, and I came down to Palo Alto for that. At the time, she was faculty with the Institute of Mental Research, I think it was. Yeah.
Was that a large group that you took it with, or small, or?
Well, that was Jay Haley, Paul Watzlawick, and that group, MRI. Maybe it was the Mental Research Institute. Jay Haley and Watzlawick, at that time, they were doing very, many innovative things. And Francine was affiliated with that institute.
Oh, okay. Anybody else from that training that we could know, like in the EMDR community?
Well, there are 13 trainers. All of us are still around and taking their training within maybe sometime in 1990, 90, or around that area, 1991. All of us, at least, 3 years, experience in using EMDR. And of course, you still have Robbie Dutton, who's the executive director now of the EMDR Institute, who was working with Francine at the beginning, since the beginning. So she's there at the EMDR Institute.
She's still there.
Yeah.
Okay.
81.
So she came to Seattle.
She's in California.
Right. Well, I may try to talk to her. Do you think she'd talk to me about this?
Yeah, she'd try to talk with her. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll ask her. I've emailed with Robbie. I kind of know of her. So Francine came to Seattle to do a training for those state patrol therapists, or
no. This was separate from that. I had sponsored the training, and in working with the Washington Psychological Association, I coordinated the workshop, sponsored the workshop. That was outside
of that.
State Patrol. That was outside to send out some announcements, and again, people came. They were starting to hear about it.
Well, that's what I wondered. Was there resistance to EMDR at that time? There was.
Tremendous. Some people, of course, were interested and intrigued, and were using it and getting great results. But at that time, there was a lot of resistance. And, Francine came upon this by accident, her famous walk in the park. She didn't come out of academia, for example. And actually, she was a graduate student at the time, and the 1989 study was her doctoral dissertation. So in the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism. What's this about? Bring up memory and eye movement. Is it hypnosis? Is it exposure? Is it nothing? So it was a lot of resistance at that time, a lot of criticism. So that was, we were just a small band at that time. And, dealing with that, and Francine's answer to that was research. Do the research. And her favorite line, when we would tell her about a case and a case example of something that happened that was good, miraculous, she would say, "Write it up." And at conferences, when she would present, she urged people, write it up. It just takes 5 case studies to go into the literature. And over time, of course, the research built. And so today, EMDR is accepted as an evidence-based treatment for trauma. And it's also been widely utilized with a variety of psychological disorders.
Right. So when she picked you because she knew you through inviting her up to Seattle.
I was interested, and I was, interested in helping out and interested in, at that time being a trainer, because she was starting to put together a training team too, because when she would go and teach and there'd be the practical exercises, there would have to be some facilitators. So
I see.
So she asked people, if people were interested, and I, certainly was.
Oh, that's right. You went to that first training.
Okay, we had that conversation where said I would indeed be interested, and she was happy about that. And it was somewhere 93. We met down again in Palo Alto and started going through the training, and then we would accompany her at the trainings, watching her, and also presenting pages. So she trained us. We would present pages from the manual, and she would give us feedback. And then we would meet periodically.
Was she pretty direct with her feedback?
I'm sorry?
Was she pretty direct with her feedback? I mean, she let you know.
Was she pretty direct? Absolutely. So again, she was very straightforward. Again, she was brilliant. But I experienced her as a very patient teacher, very accepting. And then with me in particular, especially when again, as far as whether it be maybe teaching style or what I was teaching, we would go over it. She was patient and gentle, just a wonderful, wonderful mentor. And then as the years would go on, I would show her my videotapes as well. And so continue to get her insight. And we wrote together. She was one of the things I most valued about our relationship is she would edit everything I wrote professionally, which I greatly appreciated. Because she could take my writing, which was okay, and really turn it into something good. That was her. And we've published maybe 5 articles together. And I miss that. I now have a book out on EMDR therapy with grief and mourning, or treatment of grief and mourning. And this is what I, really, really missed her input, too. But at the same time, it's certainly anything I write, especially when it comes to EMDR, is positively influenced by her.
Okay. So when she picked the first 13 people, did you all get together and do a trainer?
Yes, we did.
Trainers? Oh, yes, you did. You knew you got to meet all. Oh, really?
We would, when we can, we would accompany her to, trainings, New York, Philadelphia, Florida, San Francisco, Denver. We were the first facilitators, basically.
Oh.
Yeah. And we would present pages at the same time. And then after a while, after a few months, we started to do the training in pairs. So we would be training in pairs in 90, I think in 94, we were training on our own in pairs. And also it was 94, I started training in, at some point independently.
Okay.
The EMDR Institute.
So when would you go out to dinner then at night or have lunch together?
Yes, we'd go out to dinner. That was a very...
Was it fun, or?
Aspect. That was a very, fun and important, part of who we were. The training, we'd go out to dinner after a training.
Yeah.
Francine was again, a wonderful, inspirational speaker, but more or less an introvert. She preferred a small group of friends as opposed to loud parties.
Okay.
So at conferences where we were all together, again, we'd go out to dinner, and of course, the always a topic of conversation with the development and future of EMDR therapy. So then also she was a good friend, and I was attended her wedding many years ago to with Bob, our trainers were there, and other friends, a circle of friends, and yes, and again she had very close, very deep friendships, and of course relationships, and the forefront. What was always, important to her, and she always kept her eye on the development of EMDR therapy and always steered it in a positive direction, dealing with the criticism. And it would hurt her, the personal attacks on her. Indeed, it hurt her. It would hurt all of us. But she would respond to it brilliantly, and continued to articulate the adaptive information processing model, which guides EMDR therapy, continued to write, and she guided the development of EMDR internationally.
Do you have any stories that pop into your mind about like having dinner or going to the wedding or meeting her at the airport?
Well, there's a number of things that stand out. Probably the time where you got to know her the most was traveling with her to Europe. There was a conference in Cork, Ireland, County Cork, and a whole group of us, and taking a tour of the countryside. There was somebody there who knew how to drive on that side of the road, and she and I went to visit the Blarney Castle. And again, you have to stoop pretty low, get on your back and stoop low to kiss it. I did that, but Francine didn't do that. She still, again, at that time, she was a cancer survivor and worked very hard, but she would be very tired after her training. But that was a great trip. And then traveling with her there to Germany and again, presenting, with her, and traveling with her to Israel. She would teach. She would teach that if there's tension or headache, maybe up and down could be very soothing. And we were in Jerusalem and going on a tour. She had taught in the day, and after the training, we were going and seeing some of they had just opened a new section of the wall in Jerusalem, and she just had a slight headache. And, hey, Francine, let's go up and down. And she said, it works. Okay.
So she would have you do it on her.
Yeah. And then she liked a practical joke too. She could be funny and had a great sense of humor as well.
She did. See, we don't know this.
She was deadly serious. When she wanted something, she wanted it done yesterday, and she wanted it done this way. Okay. And again, on one hand, again, that yes, very demanding. This is what you need to do, and everything else. But at the same time, at the same time, she was respected, and she was a wonderful leader. In that she would listen to everybody's viewpoint.
Okay.
And, we would again, another thing I appreciated her, is her dazzling brilliance. So it's very rare that there's somebody walks the earth with the brilliance and insight into human nature that she had, and I think people can appreciate that now. But when we'd have a question, or why do we do this, or what's going on here, just to hear her expound on it. And like I said, when you hear her lecture, of course, she's brilliant. But when I was writing with her and we're going back and forth on a paper, I present some ideas, and then I could really see how she could put things together and really just see how brilliant she was.
Okay. So there's an extra
diverse ideas together and integrate it into an explanation of human nature and what's going on. But at the same time, too, there was, as much as she was an adherent to the model, she also, was widely read, flexible, and open. So when I started getting into the structural dissociation of the personality, which has a different frameworks, it's looking at dissociation as a division of the personality. And this is when I was collaborating with Onno van der Hart, which I still do, and Ellert Nienhuis, and we were, writing an article together. And, Francine would look at some of my videotapes when I'd be working with different parts and adding in some resource or some bilateral stimulation for resource. And we were talking about that. And what still stands out for me is she's saying, all right, working there with parts, but you're bringing in EMDR elements. And that was a nice way to start to think about EMDR therapy, because we have our standard protocol. And friends, we said it's not one size fits all, and it's not a cookie cutter, that we certainly have to bring it to the client and go with the client. And then there are going to be times we're going to be utilizing other frameworks that are appropriate for the clinical population.
She was open to doing that. She was open to that. On one
hand, she defended the model, but when we talk and can look at the videotape, she could see where things would fit in. And, today, EMDR therapy is starting to, it's been broadened in many ways.
Yes.
Based on her principles. There still is the standard protocol. But there are going to be times, and as she was pointing out, we need to make modifications for specific clinical populations. And there are going to be some other times we may be doing other things, but bringing in some EMDR elements, like I was doing. And I still remember a conversation where, too, she's, as I was showing her one of the, videotapes of a session, and she said, well, I go by the results. We're going to go by the results. Let's see how this is working out and what's happening. So again, always looking at the results, understanding the clinical perspective, and again, a champion of EMDR therapy. But when we really talk, look at the videos, bring in the other perspectives, too. It was just, wonderful conversations. So, and she grew EMDR. And in the very beginning, we had to sign, releases or sign paper saying that we would not teach it. In other words, she would teach it, but we would sign an agreement not to teach it because there were other methods and people that she knew that had methods that had good clinical methods, and people would take the course and start teaching it, and then it would get ruined. So she was criticized for that, but in the end, she turned to be right because the standard protocol stood. And then in 95, once there was the corroborative research that was published in 95, then we didn't need any more of these kind of agreements. The research on the standard protocol. And the standard protocol hasn't really changed since 95. Now the wording has, and our manual, we've updated the language, and we've change how we do the for example, the future template a number of different times. It's different than before. I remember it was before COVID. So there we are on Christmas Eve. I think I was in Italy and she's there in California, and we needed to get everything finished, for the publication of the new manual on the future template at that time. And we've since clarified some of the language from then, but as she said, that we will keep changing and shifting it as there's new data or we start learning new things. And that's the flexibility of EMDR therapy. The AIP model is written on rubber. As new data, research, comes in, we can pull it and stretch it to accommodate it.
Mm-hmm. Did she develop the AIP model?
Yes.
Or is that something that was already in the literature?
That is her model. First, it was called the Accelerated Information Processing Model, because EMDR therapy, memory processing could be fairly rapid, but the connotation of that is that it's a quick fix. So the name was changed to the adaptive information processing model. And that is It did not come from the literature. That came from her.
Oh. Well, there's another question I have too, because Francine, like in the interweaves or the negative cognitions, there's responsibility,
safety,
choice,
safety, control. And we added a fourth one since she's died, connection too. So connection and belonging.
Connection and belonging. So what is the order now? Connection and belonging, safety.
So that would have been in 21 that, again, there is a training committee. And again, we started talking about, especially at the time, the racism, social exclusion, sexism, ageism, all the isms, the I don't belong, but we wanted to put in an interpersonal aspect. So it's an overlapping theme, connection, I don't belong, or alone, I don't fit in, I'm different and that's not okay. And the other thing is it taps into attachment theory. For me, as a fan of attachment theory in Bowlby, the centerpiece of attachment is that attachment is safety. We come into this world wired to attach to a caregiver for safety. Right. And when it's not there, of course, this is where the themes develop. I'm not good enough. It's my fault. I'm bad. I'm not lovable. I'm powerless. I'm not safe. But there can also be that sense of I don't belong. So we want to take that social context, and it's overlapping. Because if somebody says I'm alone, on one hand, yes, that's something that overlaps with other themes. I'm alone and I'm not safe. I'm alone and not good enough, or I'm alone and I'm powerless. But it could also be a standalone. I'm not, there's a lack of connection. I'm alone. And the positive cognition, I can connect. I'm capable of connecting. Or the I don't belong, belong. I do belong, taking into account the, social interaction, marginalization that happens in society, as well as within basic early attachment relationships. So that is an overarching theme that we've added. And
but the first one, do I?
I'm sure Francine would be very happy with that.
She'd be happy with it. The first one, though, is responsibility.
Responsibility.
But either I did something wrong, or I didn't do something I should have done.
Yeah, there could be the shame. Shame is I am something wrong. I'm not good enough. It could also be guilt, my fault. The irrational guilt. I did something wrong, and it's I got hit, I got abused because I'm bad. It's my fault, or I am something wrong. I'm not good enough. So that's right. And when I'm alone could fit into that. I'm alone and not good enough on one hand. It could fit into any of these categories. But if we look at the negative cognition as a clinical theme, it's a spotlight. And we're talking about a way to start conceptualizing problems. It's like putting a spotlight on the issue of connection, attachment.
On the felt sense of attachment. But still, I wonder, this is kind of getting back, so if I'm not responsible and then doing this, he goes, well, I didn't do that. It's not my fault, right? Then it goes to the next level is I'm safe now. And then it goes to the next level. I have choices.
Yeah,
those are themes. Is she the one that saw the themes is my question.
Is she the one who thought of these things? We can't find a reference for it. I've talked with her about it, where she got it. And she says, she got it from many places, but we really don't have any reference from that. So when she was writing, she talked about responsibility, safety, and choices, but we could never find a reference where she got it. She just said it was kind of common clinical thinking. So it isn't. I think it may have been something that she gleaned from a lot of the reading that she did. All right, even though we don't necessarily know exactly where she got those things. Maybe it was her.
Or she could have seen it. What I guess I thought is that maybe she saw it when she was doing EMDR with people, because you can see it in a session or two that
That's
they go,
right.
oh, I'm no longer responsible. Oh, I'm safe now.
That's right. Just maybe
It unfolds pretty quickly.
her clinical acumen and her clinical skills, she could see the different themes and came up with this conceptualization and was being modest about it.
I think that's my take on it, but that's what I'm asking you, your take.
Yeah, that she was just being modest
Could be.
about it. Because she was just, very brilliant and had such an insight into human nature.
So how are they different now than they were?
Well,
how have they evolved?
The training continues to evolve.
Yeah.
And, for example, it's evolved over the years from a 2-day training to, now 6 days for the basic and a number of specialty courses. And there's a lot more emphasis now on case conceptualization and treatment planning. So it went from a technique that you do the same thing every time, and then to like a protocol with principles and procedures, to a psychotherapeutic model, an integrative psychotherapeutic model. So it's grown that way over the years. And now there's a big emphasis. We've changed the name of the phase 1. It's history taking and treatment planning. So we gather the information, then we come up with a treatment plan based on the needs and priorities of the client and the situation that they're in. So then the application of EMDR therapy is continually utilized with different clinical populations. The standard protocol hasn't changed, all right, but there are some
which is amazing.
Modifications. It's still the 8 phases that you pace and have flexibility according to the needs of the client. It's not a rigid protocol. It's something really very, very flexible. And then, of course, knowing more about, as we do now, about dissociation, complex trauma, the stabilization needs are something that we're more aware of.
That's increased.
That's right. That's
more phase 2.
Stable is our stabilization phase, and again, to be sure the client is able to maintain dual awareness and stabilization and preparation. So we've added to that name. It used to be the preparation phase. Now it's the preparation and stabilization phase. So because as we're dealing with complex trauma, and the person is not able to stay within the window of tolerance, then we need to be able to do things to raise integrative capacity so the client can stay present, have that dual attention when reprocessing a distressing memory.
Well, and early on, it was recognized that EMDR triggers dissociation, or how did that come together? Because didn't she doing EMDR with
the
folks?
very, very beginning, especially as we take a look at the 90s, and not just EMDR, but at the time, think about exposure therapy, starting to do memory work, before a client was emotionally ready. So it's not just EMDR therapy. So the research has shown that people with complex trauma and dissociative disorder have disorganized attachment. Now, it had a disorganized attachment. And that's characterized by affect dysregulation, low self-esteem, difficulty in relationships. And when you think about complex trauma, as Vanderhart and others have conceptualized it, that there can be a division in the personality with one or more parts engaging in everyday living and one or more parts that are living in trauma time. Memory networks holding the trauma that can have their own sense of self. And of course, this is on a continuum too. So we've come with experience and research and knowledge and integrating other frameworks to better understand the dynamics of personality and how indeed psychological survival may be a division in the personality and a phobia between the different parts of the personality because the traumatic memory was too much. So these are old, actually, psychotherapeutic principles. But in the 90s, exposure was mainly used. With trauma-focused CBT or hypnotic abreaction, or even family sculpting. These are things that can be very upsetting. And of course, EMDR therapy. So at the time, there was a lot of exposure. And so we've, in EMDR therapy, we've grown with the field, appreciating and understanding more about how to utilize EMDR therapy, and that stabilization can be informed by the therapeutic frameworks that are out there for stabilization and treatment planning and memory processing. And so we make appropriate modifications to the protocol depending on the needs of the client. Francine is always stressed, assess for dissociative disorder. She's said that
from the very start.
From the very beginning.
From the very start?
That's right.
And is that related to the bilateral stimulation or not?
It's saying that assess that again, if somebody, EMDR therapy could be very helpful, and indeed there may be intense emotions, and that was something, reliving the memory, exposure. That was how things were done in the 90s. But as the field grew and EMDR therapy grew, we would emphasize do assessment, and we included the dissociative experience scale.
When did that come along? When was that included?
That was for screening. And so that was very early. We started adding that in.
The DES?
So been there in the beginning, but at the time we were starting to teach, we were really emphasizing that.
Even by that time. So that was like 93 or 94,
That's right.
You said, right?
That's right.
But I guess I'm hearing the dissociative piece, you're saying, is not necessarily related to the bilateral stimulation. It's more the exposure.
No. What happens, it's not that the bilateral stimulation is going to go and create dissociation. No, I don't believe that's the way it works.
Okay.
What happens is that a client can have memories that are too much. And EMDR therapy can be powerful. And as we start to get into one memory, it can start to open up other memories or feelings that can be too much for the client. So it's not that the bilateral stimulation is creating it.
Well, I think it's creating linkages, right?
It's creating what? Images?
Linkage from one neural network to the next.
Yes. It does start the chain of association, and it could start to link in. It's already there. So that's one of
So you have isolated neural networks that are now linking up.
That's right. So we have to be sure the client can stay present, because we can start to go in on a memory that can be and the linkages can be something that's too much for the client. So this is where we urge caution, because we can start with one memory and we can get to linkages of more intense emotion or linkages to memories that are too much. No. Yes.
And that, I think, is due to the bilateral stimulation causing the neural networks to link up.
Yes, we're doing a few things here. We're accessing the memory as it's stored, all right? And then we're adding the bilateral stimulation. We're doing both. And that starts to create a chain of associations. And that can lead to a reliving of the traumatic experience, and also start to bring up other memories that were very distressing for the client as well.
And you were seeing that from the very start.
The linkages?
In 90, yeah.
Well, there were, at the time as we started 90 and going onward, as we had people who were also part of the EMDR community, Sandra Paulson, Jerry Puck, Kurt Rounzen, who also had expertise. Who had expertise in dissociation too.
I see.
Kathy Fine, Marilyn Luber. So there were a number of people who had come from, had a background in dissociation, who were part of our community.
So they were bringing that in. I wonder, when the first time you took the training, was it the same protocol, or surely it wasn't exactly as it is? What was the form of the protocol when you took
there
it?
certainly were the 8 phases. And at the time we took the training, I took the training, it wasn't written down. We took notes because Francine didn't want to put it out to the, because it was experimental. It wasn't until 95 that she said, all right, now there's enough research, it's no longer experimental. And we had our procedural steps outlined, and it's grown. The manual started with Francine's notes, and we had to decipher them. And the early trainers, we started to explain her notes and we would change the manual every year. So it grew.
Oh, it did change a little.
Yeah, and we're still growing the manual.
Okay. Well, I'd heard once that the protocol was developed in a hot tub in Southern California, but
Was developed when?
well, in a hot tub with a bunch of you guys sitting in a hot tub coming up with the protocol.
Well, I hadn't heard that, but yeah,
Yeah.
I certainly made the joke. They do it in hot tubs down there. No, the protocol. The protocol was developed after the walk in the park, and Francine started to have people bring up memory and do the bilateral stimulation, and then she started to integrate it within other psychotherapeutic frameworks and concepts that were there at the time. Again, this was part of her doctoral research. She was getting her doctorate at the time. She was working with Joseph Wolpe at the time and had a very
really
orientation, hence the term eye movement desensitization. And at that time, she thought it was just eye movement, not aware of some of the other mechanisms that we're aware of now. And of course, she kept on top of that as well. So it was a lot more than sitting in a hot tub, thinking about it. And it was the walk in the park where she put things together and then put a lot of rigorous thinking and clinical work into borrowing, as she put it, from a number of different therapeutic frameworks, how to get things started, what to do if it got stuck. And that's where she started to put together the protocol.
So she knew Joseph Wolpe?
Yes. Wolpe even published
an article
on EMDR therapy. An EMDR, or EMD it was called at the time. He even did a publication.
He did?
Yeah.
Oh.
Case study, yes.
I didn't know that. Have you met him or no?
No, I haven't. I've never met him.
He would have been older at that time, right? At that time, he was at the end of his career. One thing I wonder, you've done enough, you've trained enough folks to where you realize for a lot of people, it's hard for them to not talk, right? That's one of the harder things to learn is to do the bilateral stimulation without talking.
That's right.
Right. How was that for Francine? I mean, did she have to, was that for her to not be talking during this?
Well,
you think that was
depended on the client. There was certainly, she developed a cognitive interweave too to guide the client.
Yeah.
But the hallmark was, stay out of the way. So in part 1, we say, stay out of the way, see what the brain's going to do on its own. Then in part 2, we talked about the cognitive interweave. If things were too much or the client got stuck and it was looping. So,
but I wonder for Francine,
the hallmark was always that what we're doing is we're stimulating the brain's natural information processing mechanisms. And the client is the agent of change, not the therapist's brilliance. And as I like to say, you can't do it better than the client.
Well, what do you say? The brain does it better than the client?
Yeah, you
just
do it better than the
up.
client. Okay, the client, the client is the agent of change. The client's brain is the agent.
Yes.
And things will process in a way that's natural, for the client. And the client will come up with their own way of getting through it and coming to their own adaptive resolution. Our job is to facilitate that. And what's going on during the process is there's a lot of sensations and emotions and feelings. Cognitions come in later on. So there's still a lot of contact. There's still a big right brain connection, and the therapeutic relationship and connection with the client is crucial. And that was always there. Francine didn't do a lot of writing on it, but she certainly appreciated it. And just recently with my colleague, Michael Hazy of Germany, we did a workshop on EMDR therapy, the therapeutic relationship, or how we can enhance our therapeutic outcomes by being more aware and utilizing the therapeutic relationship. So it's also so important. So and Francine had a very powerful presence. In the beginning, she thought it was, look at that, it's just eye movement. She was not aware of everything else she was doing. So there is a therapeutic interaction and resonance, but the hallmark is, again, the therapist is very present, but unless it gets stuck, we're not intervening. We're facilitating the client coming to their own adaptive resolution. And yes, it can be very difficult for beginning therapists to shut up and stay out of the way.
But was it difficult for Francine in the first place?
Yeah.
Or for you?
Say that again, Jordan?
Well, for Francine to be able to do that, to shut up and stay out of the way, for her to have that insight,
yes,
that I got to sit here and
yes,
and for you, was that difficult to go, okay, I got to keep my mouth shut here?
Yeah.
Because that wasn't the therapeutic model at the time.
Absolutely. I showed her a videotape I had with a client that was very successful, and she pointed out where I was being too wordy. So, even back then. Yeah.
Okay. So that was some of the feedback you got from her.
That's right. You remember the client?
Well,
they told me something. They said, "Oh, go with it." And I repeated what they said. And, don't do that. You don't have to repeat what the client says. Just say, "Go with that."
Wow. Well, one thing you were doing different that I think others haven't done is you were recording very early on in your career.
Right. And a lot of my teaching
that's unusual.
I prefer videotapes. I teach by videotapes.
Right.
And so there's learned a lot along the way from the clients. I've been doing a lot of work in Ukraine, and so have learned a lot too, how war is traumatic in and of itself, and also triggers previous unresolved trauma and loss and attachment-based trauma as well. And to show these videotapes, to me, promotes optimal learning. We need to understand the clinical phenomenon, the timing, what's going on, and it's so much beyond words. It's you can't teach a person to drive a car from a lecture.
You were giving videotapes with Francine early on. I'm sure it's for her unique, is what I think. But we're having a hard time with
we used Francine's videotapes in the beginning. All right, she had videotapes, and those are the ones that we used.
Oh, but you were bringing videotapes to her of work.
Yes, and then I would start doing advanced training. Now, in the training that we do at the EMDR Institute, there are some of mine that are used. We still utilize one from '93 that is just wonderful, and then some of my videotapes are utilized in our weekend 1 and weekend 2 training. But in the beginning, there was Francine. And then, yes, I did a lot of videotaping and for my advanced workshops. And now some of these workshops are incorporated, are part 1 or part 2.
Yeah, but what I'm hearing is when you first met Francine and were working with her, you were bringing video at the time too.
Well, I would bring videotapes for her for supervision or consultation.
Yeah.
I would record when I could, and I'd go over it. It's a wonderful way to learn, and it's a wonderful way to receive.
Would she tell you to do that?
I'm sorry?
Would she tell you to do that, or did you just do it?
I think I just did it. She certainly encouraged it, but it isn't something that she ordered. But she did encourage us to make videotapes. And I did a lot of that.
So she did do that.
I did a lot of that. So still do.
Now, did she have a client caseload in the beginning?
Yes. And she also worked with other people's clients as well, who had traumas as well, when she was doing her research as well. But she did have a small caseload. And then, it is something that became smaller and smaller as she, the field grew. And then she was basically steering EMDR therapy full time, more than full time. So she did have
So even though she was fairly minimal. She was an introvert, she also, though, was well connected to other therapists.
Yeah. Well, and in other words, she was a quiet person who preferred a small, group. But again, she was very social, very funny, very talkative, too. But she didn't want to go to large parties. She didn't want to, she preferred just, the small group of friends and, not those large cocktail parties, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay.
And also was very open, good, wonderful, have a conversation with. Again, having conversations with her, just, that was just how brilliant she was. Just always just kind of dazzled me, the insights. But she also had fun. She had hobbies. We had a lot of fun going. I think we went shopping, with a group in Australia. That would have been in '94. We went over there, started training the Australians, and again, just touring and eating dinner and having a beer and laughing and too.
What was her favorite thing to eat?
Oh, I wouldn't. Let's see. First of all, as somebody surviving cancer, she would eat healthy. Salads, and again, I'm recalling vegetables. Still, I believe she was still eating meat, and yes, she would have a glass of wine, but she was never indulged in a lot of food or drinking, and she always still had to cope after her training. She'd be tired. And after surviving cancer, but still put a lot of energy into training. But I don't recall what her favorite food was, but she would certainly order off the menu, and she would certainly enjoy a drink with us. I don't think any of us really ever went overboard in that area.
No good stories there, huh?
No, not
Nothing,
that.
Okay.
Yeah, just good quiet conversation and having a drink and always our focus on developing EMDR therapy and supporting one another and as well. And
how do you see EMDR evolving or progressing now that Francine's gone?
Well, it really is progressing. It really is progressing in that there's the broader perspective. So as I said before, there's the standard protocol. Then there's modifications of the standard protocol that will make for the specific populations too.
Mm-hmm.
Also, EMDR therapy is guided by other therapeutic frameworks that become known. So for example, when I'm working with complex trauma or dissociative disorder, the theory of structural dissociation guides, can inform how we would do preparation and stabilization and some modifications to how we would do phase 3 and, the memory reprocessing phases as well. So this is how EMDR therapy is growing. Then there's also very specialized procedures that can be utilized where we're adding in EMDR elements. So that's not standard protocol, but as I said earlier, we're adding in EMDR elements.
By that, do you mean going back into history and finding the early neural template or early neural imprints? Or when you say adding EMDR elements, are you talking about bilateral stimulation?
One of the things that's helpful, I find, with complex trauma is when we can look at an emotional part of the personality. On one hand, it's a memory network, but it has its own sense of self and is living in trauma time. And there can be a part of the personality not knowing that in 2023, what happened back then is over and not happening now. And so helping a client, to realize or that an emotional part to realize that it's over, childhood is over, and it's safe today in 2023 is something very positive. And we can enhance that with bilateral stimulation in much the same way we would do a resource installation. That would be an example of adding in an EMDR element, adding in that bilateral stimulation.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, that's. And you know what I've wondered too, some of the like the future template. When did you and the early people practice with each other? Did you try it out with each other and
well, we would start
see what would happen?
Yes, we would. We would start putting it together, experimenting with our clients, trying with ourselves, trying with clients, discussing it, and started putting it together too, based on what was working and continuing to develop it, continually.
So like you guys would sit down and after a training and sit down and do each other with bilateral just to see to work.
It would be a discussion of what we were seeing in the practice and with the client rather than doing it with each other. Certainly, certainly we could do things with each other, but we weren't doing therapy with each other. We were refining the techniques based on what we were seeing in practice and with our clients.
Right.
So, Jordan, I'm going to have to go. It's 4:00, and the granddaughter is going for gymnastic lessons. So,
quickly, who else might I talk to? Who are some other ideas?
Well, you can go with Robbie Dutton at the EMDR Institute.
Robbie, okay, is that it?
Yeah,
Sandra?
Yeah, she's the executive director at the EMDR Institute.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah.
All right, Jordan, you take care. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye.